Hi, Sanjeev. Welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure and honor to be here.
I remember, Sanjeev, the last time when we spoke, that particular podcast itself was a huge hit, mainly because of the value nuggets that came out of it, and is precisely the reason that I so wanted to discuss about this new role that has come up, which is on Chief AI Officer. Talking about which, I realized that as an AI executive, you never work alone. You work along with your partners, the peer executives. Those could be from business leaders, the data leaders, technology leaders. And what I've seen is there is an expectation management, which is very crucial for this role. And I'll give you one example. Most of the time, my teams used to come back to me and say that, Vidhi, there are so many unknown unknowns that we hit upon, and we start with a certain goal. There is a certain deadline, definitely, but the whole charter that we pick up is not deterministic in itself, right? We can stumble upon roadblocks, and those are not foreseen for us. Then as an AI executive, you have to tell your peer executives and then bring them on board of the challenges of delivering an AI project. How do you see this role being, doing that effectively, and what is the right way to do that expectation management?
Yeah, I mean, to start with, I would say for sure this role, a chief AI officer type of role, is something I think very new, and many companies are probably just still getting their heads around it. I mean, the many companies probably haven't yet assigned a specific title to a person yet on that role, and some are starting to do that. But definitely, many companies will have AI teams for sure, and having a leader of that team is something new to a lot of companies. And as you said, there is hype out there. So just touching on the hype part of it, from what I see in terms of AI, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly of AI. And so, on the good side, absolutely, it's well known what the benefits of AI can bring to an organization, whether internally focused or externally focused. So that's fairly clear, and it's clear across the different areas beyond just the AI teams itself. I think the business side, the data teams, they quite understand, and the operational teams understand that AI can bring certain benefits to them. But on the bad side, I think there is a bit of over enthusiasm around AI and expectations of what AI can bring to the company. I read about a term that was coined recently called AI washing, where companies are going out and just claiming that they have AI, but it's not truly AI. And with that sort of thing, it brings a certain, I think there is an enthusiasm and an expectation with other teams of what AI can bring. And the ugly part of it obviously is the stuff around things that are not clear today, things like ethics and responsible AI. Or even, what's not clear and is emerging now is around intellectual property, who owns the content around that, the privacy issues, or even, beyond that, I think the liability shift that we've seen recent cases of, at least in Canada, where the courts are going with customers who claim that the AI tool advised them on something. And so it appears that companies cannot get away from the output of AI in terms of being responsible for that, and what any impact of that might have on a customer. The liability is still with the businesses, and so that sort of set a precedent. When you look at the good, bad, and ugly, it's really important that a chief AI officer, just like any other department, doesn't act in a silo in a company. You have to partner with the other areas of the business so that the chief AI officer can bring that experience and as well as a balanced approach to helping the rest of the company understand what are the true benefits and the values that AI can bring there, but also help them understand, the downsides, temper some of that enthusiasm a little bit, but also address some of the risk aspects of it. And now at the same time, the AI teams and the chief AI officer can't do that alone. They need inputs back from the team. So it is a team effort, because once these, as you said, unknown unknowns appear, it becomes a team effort to try and resolve them. The AI team can bring a certain amount of expertise to helping to do that, but you do need inputs from the other teams as well, and having contingency plans around that to manage the risk around it. Because AI as a technology itself is very new for many companies. I mean, they don't know even how it's almost like a black box for them in terms of the outputs that are coming out of it. So they need someone who's experienced who can tackle through that, because I think with AI, you're now starting to see new sorts of risks appear, which is a little different from previous technologies that we've seen. There are some of the risks are similar, but others are relatively new to an organization, and being able to navigate through those risks is something that's new that I think a chief AI officer brings to the table, but needs to partner with others to make sure that they do that in the right way and address that. And I think simulation testing as well will be important for those unknown unknowns if they do appear. Although, I mean, if it is unknown, it's hard to predict what it is. But if you can somehow simulate scenarios where, how would you deal if a situation like that does happen, I think would be helpful. And you need to bring in all the different players in a company.
Well said, Sanjeev, because the word that you used, AI washing, I've seen and heard that and witnessed that firsthand. And it's more like putting an AI sticker, whether underlying you have AI or not, having a sound of AI, that's also fine with the companies. AI first, AI powered, AI enabled, anything you give with AI, and then the market will go.
Right.
However, I still think that the reality has started to settle in. Like if you're selling something which does not truly give the value of AI, they would not sign up for it. So that's also one of the things. And on that unknown thing, there was a team when they did not have an AI leader and they were reporting just to a technology leader. You could be doing it for a CTO. And then when you hit upon the roadblocks and you try to go and explain them, most of the times it comes across as you are giving some or the other excuse because things are not working out. And then, there was a colleague of mine who was saying that, Vidhi, tell me, these kind of things happening, is it because my team is not capable enough to deliver on AI promises, or is it because, and then the or part is important, that or is because the technology itself is like this, that you really need to have that kind of experience, seeing the good, bad, and ugly thing, that somebody who has seen the good, bad, and ugly side of it knows what works, what doesn't work. So in this scenario, you have a case A where you're the leader that you're reporting to as a team. That leader themselves have not seen those kind of scenarios. So for them, it comes across as it might be an excuse or lack of skills, as compared to the one who knows that yes, I have seen in my past. First is I know that you are saying something for true, and second is I know the solution for it. I know that what you're saying, unknown unknowns, maybe I can help you, navigate the situation further. Because as a chief AI officer, the major role that you're doing is making the right decisions, the kind of trade-offs you
Right.
are taking. So decision making becomes very crucial for this role. So I think your team's morale kind of lifts up when you are having that AI expert into the room. And the C-suite element comes that you have little more authority as compared to this role could be done by a head of AI or any other designation. When you kind of elevate it to that level, the authority comes.
I think that's important because you need someone who brings in that experience. The hype around AI today, like I would say in the hype cycle, we're probably at the peak of that enthusiasm part of it. And I think, as you said, people are starting to realize that uh, um, the benefits of it, it still need to be tested. And we're going through that cycle right now. But having someone who brings in that experience and has had experience around being exposed to different risks and how to navigate through those risks is definitely a skill that is part of a chief AI officer. And then, yes, having them at the right level, at the C-suite level or a senior executive level, helps in terms of being listened to. And because this is new, and you don't want to end up in a situation where you're introducing new AI tools, but you don't have the full picture, and so you need that partner at that level who can bring it in. Now, in the past, we always had chief data officers, and whether this role is separate from a chief data officer role or is combined with the chief data officer role, I think that'll evolve over time because they do sort of touch each other quite a lot, and it sort of makes sense to have that combined role. But and some of the areas that a chief data officer is worried about, like governance of data, ties very closely with the AI side as well, governance around AI as well. So, but certainly it builds the morale of the team, of the data scientists and the AI experts. And it's not left to them to defend themselves when an unknown comes. They know that they've got a champion there who comes in with that experience. Um, it is a very new role, so some of that experience may come and skill sets of navigating it may come from someone who comes from a different area but has exposure to that and has been exposed to that, and so comes in with that experience and then adds on that AI piece. But it would be someone at then a senior level who would do that.
Yeah, because I think data science itself, to be honest, like I've been in the ground doing the work. I know it's a very stressful job. First of all, doing the work and delivering and then communicating the value of it and making sure it gets adopted. So for your teams, definitely when the stress reduces, when you know that the person you're talking to understands the same language and is able to then, pass your word further. So that's good. And another thing that you mentioned about hype cycle, there are so many terms related to hype cycle and the jargons in general, I would say. The ones that I remember are that because of the hype, the rush, and the moment you see that the peers in the market for any enterprise when they are doing a lot of experiments on the experiments, not the reality. What happens is they see that there are so many things we can do, but there is so little time. Like the I think the execs, they go crazy when they see the potential, but they don't know what it takes to kind of convert that potential into reality, potential to practical. I can say that. So when you have so many things, I think the best way for any C-suite is to put down a prioritization order. So it's like the word I use for that is opportunity estimation. I use that word very frequently, but I've still not seen somebody kind of laying down a framework in their organization to be effectively making a use of that. I think it could be in terms of, and the word which is closely resonating with opportunity estimation is value proposition. If you know high value tickets, high value items that you should be doing, what factors do you think you should bake in to see what are the right opportunities for your organization, your business, your market, your industry? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think it ties to a broader question about the AI strategy itself to start with. One of the key roles of having that chief AI officer there is that they can establish a strategy. And when we say strategy, what exactly are we talking about here? So the way I look at it is, first of all, at the end of the day, they're running a business, and so the business has to be very clear, and the AI executive has to be crystal clear on what is it that the company's vision is, what are they aspiring to be, what are they the answer to for their customers, like what are they trying to answer, what is the big question in their customer's mind or the job to be done that the customer wants to get done that points to them and says, yes, I want to hire this company to do it. And once you have that sort of direction and pointer, the strategy itself is how do we get there from here to there in by building capabilities or assets that'll get us to that point, and what's that path look like. And so from an AI perspective, I think there are probably three focus areas that an AI executive needs to focus on. So, if I was to break it down, I've seen a few companies do this where they look at AI from, what are the elementary foundational AI elements that need to be in place? That's important. So the platforms, the governance structure, the data quality issues, that needs to be taken care of first. In addition to that, the other two areas I think would be, one is sort of the everyday AI for internal use cases. So that would be, how do we expose AI to the rest of the company so that we can augment the work that they're doing, whether it's on a day-to-day basis using tools like Copilot. How do we, democratize AI to bring it to the everyday person and let them be better and more productive in their jobs? Or it could even extend all the way to looking at a specific functional area and saying, how can we infuse AI into this area to make it more efficient or make it more productive or help make better decisions even from, using predictive analytics or things like that. And then maybe the third area is more customer facing AI, where, you need to look at how do, how can we use AI and embed it into the products that we have today so that it better solves the job to be done of that customer, the reason the customer is hiring us to begin with, or makes it a better experience for the customer itself. And so these three sort of buckets I would look at to start with, because the opportunities and the value proposition then will tie into this. So, when we look at the opportunities, for example, how do I decide on, as you said, there are tons of opportunities out there. How do I decide which ones to prioritize? Because AI teams are limited, the resources are very limited. What's the best way to prioritize it? One way to do it, and I would steal the page out of the book of the product teams, the way we look at it on the product side is, first of all, try to understand within these sort of broad category areas, you have to look at your customers. And when I say customers, I don't necessarily mean external customers. It could even be internal customers. What are their needs? What are their outcomes? Because whatever AI product you create for them to use has to solve that need of theirs today. And I will say that not every problem needs to be solved with AI. Sometimes it doesn't. But once you understand what their needs are and what they're trying to achieve, you need to ask them, how important is that need for them? to solve. What is the importance? What are they doing today to solve it? And how satisfied are they with what they're doing? Because if they tell you, for example, that it's an area that's very important to them and they have a workaround, but it's a very manual process and it takes them tons of time to do, that gap between how important it is and how satisfied they are with the way they're doing things today is the opportunity gap. And that can be measured to see, how big is that opportunity? If there's a big gap, then certainly that's an area. If AI can help, make it more effective, then we can narrow that gap. So that's sort of one way to approach it in terms of figuring out the opportunities. And when you look at them across the different areas, you'll see that the difference between the importance of it and the satisfaction they have. That opportunity gap is different for different needs of the companies. And so you can quickly decide, these are where the biggest opportunities are. And that also needs to tie to things like, is it driving revenue growth? Like, what are the things that if we solve in that area, is it going to help the company as a whole from a strategic standpoint? So can it help us, for example, drive more revenue, or can it reduce costs for us overall? What's the extent of that? Can it position us from a branding perspective, going back to the AI washing piece, but from a brand positioning standpoint, does it position us in a certain way? Or maybe even, sometimes what happens is you bring out a new product into a market, but the market doesn't see you as being the credible experts in that area. Will introducing AI into it give you the permission to play in that space? Will people view you as that expert? What else needs to be done to have that permission to play in that space? All of those things need to be factored in to prioritize what are the best opportunities to go after that'll deliver at the end of the day the biggest return on your investment and benefits to the company as a whole in those ways. So that's one way to sort of look at opportunities and prioritizing them. You did talk about value proposition, and that's another sort of interesting area. Value proposition, the way I would define value proposition, I'll give you some examples actually even of value proposition. To me, value proposition really is, what are those capabilities or assets that you have that are unique to your company that is not easily replicated by your competitors, right? So, for example, right now, my role at SimCorp, my team, we create fraud solutions for the financial services industry, fraud and financial crime solutions. And one of the things that the team's developed is this consortium network database, where we've got a bunch of financial institutions that provide us with their data for the specific purpose of detecting and fighting fraud. That database itself, that asset, is so valuable for us because it gives us a unique picture and insights into how payments go across different financial institutions, that we have a better way of detecting fraud because we can see cross bank transactions, that we can do something that the banks on their own can't do because they only see their own data, but they don't see the cross bank data. So having that central sort of repository is a value proposition for us. It makes it really powerful from that standpoint. And that's an asset for us that, we use and we can build on. And it's not easily replicated by competitors. And it's a reason why we've been really successful in that space itself. Even in my previous role, I used to head up the data products team at a company called Moneris. So it just as background, they're the largest credit and debit card processors, payment processors in Canada. And my team's mandate was to build out insights and intelligence solutions for merchants and for marketers. And the value proposition there was the data again. It was, we had the footprint of 1 in 3 transactions across the country would flow through our systems. And so we could see how consumer spending was happening in real time. And that was the value proposition we had that nobody else could replicate. Taking it, from an AI perspective, the question that the chief AI officer probably needs to ask is, what can we build using AI that will give us a unique edge over our customers, a unique asset that we own that they can't easily replicate, but will help us give us an edge with the customers so that it improves the willingness to pay for the customer. Some theoretical, if you read in the books, there is a theoretical formula for calculating value proposition as well. And, they typically say it's the willingness to pay of a customer that's greater than the actual price that they pay. So, you take like a Tesla car, for example, people place a very high willingness to pay for it because of the value it brings, whether it's automated AI functions that let it be autonomous to a certain extent, or even just the way it makes people feel, or the EV factor because it's electronic. Those increase the willingness to pay. Those value propositions increase that willingness to pay for a customer over one of the traditional car company, the cars that they have out there. So the goal for the AI, the chief AI officer, is really to think about how can we use AI so that it increases that willingness to pay of the customer, even if you can't measure it in quantifiable terms. Like, how do we increase that willingness to pay of the customer so that that gap of their willingness to pay versus what they're actually paying increases? And that can be attributed to the value proposition that you're driving through these new AI products that you're releasing to them.
Makes sense. And that's interesting as well. The example that you give, Sanjeev, I have a couple of things on those. So when you mentioned that the moment it doesn't become a level playing field as compared to the competitors is in terms of the data assets, at least in this case. So aren't the competitors analyzing, identifying, or giving a heads up on the fraud with the same kind of visibility into the ecosystem? Like they don't get to see the cross bank data?
They wouldn't, because in this sense, like the banks would be dealing. We've set up the governance structure with the banks because remember, it's not easy to just simply ask a bank to give you the data. They have to trust you. You have to have the right mechanism. So the value proposition comes from the data itself, but it also comes from the fact that we've set up the right governance structure, the legal frameworks with them, so that they provide us with that data. A competitor won't be able to replicate that. It'll be very hard for them to recreate that, and also the history of the types of data that we have feed into it. So all of that improves the value proposition that we have, the uniqueness of what we can offer versus a competitor that's trying to get into that space. And the cost of a competitor trying to do that might be too significant for them to then be able to catch up. So companies are always looking at, what is the value proposition we can create that will be very hard to replicate, or the cost to build it by a competitor will be so hard, so that customers, it then gives us automatically the permission to play with the customer in that space. And when a customer has a problem, they immediately think of you, that I need to work with this company and use them because they have the capabilities, they've got the assets, they've got that value proposition. In our case, it's, you've got the governance structure in there. You have the experience as well of running a consortium sort of data. And it's not that there aren't other consortium data players out there. There are, but they may play in different areas. The data sets that they have may not be the same as the data sets that we have. So depending on all of that, each one has their own sort of value proposition as well.
Yeah. Who is having the ownership of the data in terms of when you have the governance in place, which I assume means that you've been given the authorization to do the analytics on data. We are seeing a lot of cases where, okay, so the user has given the authorization to the bank maybe, and then across the banks, and maybe when your organization, whoever enterprise like sits at the intersection of that, how does this data privacy kind of takes place? Like, do you really need to have extra measures and controls on that? And when that happens, and the reason I'm giving you a context of why I'm asking this reason. Recently, I had a conversation with one enterprise where they were saying that even if we get certain data and this data is being kind of stored in XYZ server, if something goes wrong, it goes wrong there, which is outside of our realm. And then now we don't have the ownership. So we are kind of staying safe, which makes me wonder, are we really safe this way by kind of offloading the bit of accountability part, which I do not certainly believe. So as an AI executive, I'm just thinking like, even if I'm sitting on that quantum of data assets, how do I even start approaching that? And if, for those, I want some pointers from you.
Yeah, you've touched on a very big topic around data ownership, and it's an interesting topic. So data ownership, the way I look at it, at least in the environments that I've been in, it is a complicated issue, especially in my previous role when I was on the card processing side, because on that side, the company used to process billions of transactions every year. And they used to get the transactions from merchants. But the question is now, who owns the transactional data? Is it the company, the payment processor itself? Do they own it? Or is it the merchants? Because merchants can say, that's my data, it's my transactional data. Or is it the card holder?
Yeah.
To say that, actually, no, it's actually my data. You charge my card
Yeah.
for this. So it wasn't clear as to the ownership is it the merchant's data or the cardholder's data? But the way the approach that we took was we are not the owners of the data, we're the custodians of that data. And so, as the custodians of the data, there's a certain amount of responsibility on our side to make sure that it's secure and that whatever we do with that is done in a privacy sensitive way. And it's the same in the case in your role where I view it as we are still the custodians of this data. The individual financial institutions are the ones that provide it to us. It's a separate question of now, is that data owned by the banks and the financial institutions, or is it owned by the end consumer? I would argue it would be owned by the end consumer, and they're giving consent to the banks. On our side, from what we utilize that data for by creating sort of a consortium data set, is where the custodians of this consortium data set, we have a certain amount of responsibility. And this is where the whole governance structure has to be built. And which is why that's another value proposition that we've created is we've set up the frameworks around it to make sure that whatever we do with the data is done in a very privacy sensitive way, so that if consents are required, we get the consents. If consents are not required, because there are, and depending on which jurisdiction you're in Canada, under our privacy laws, there are certain exceptions to privacy laws, especially when it comes to fraud detection. Like if you're using it for fraud detection, then you don't necessarily need that consent. So making sure that we are using it for the right purposes and making sure that our members who are part of this alliance are aware, and we keep them apprised. We have regular meetings with them so that they know what's being done with the data itself. It's never in the dark. Even if we're using AI tools, which we do, like for example, one of our products that we do provide is around check fraud. And more specifically, it's around detecting counterfeit checks. And, we would use AI tools because AI is amazing at trying to determine, whether a check, it can look at an image of a check and tell you whether it's a counterfeit or not if you train it well enough and you build the models well enough. And so, our tool detects those counterfeit checks. Yeah, we will get questions as we build out more products using AI. We will get questions of, can you help explain how AI does that? And so being able to explain it is part of also the role within that AI team to make sure that if they're building out new tools, they understand how AI is at least using the data to do that. And it's always done. We've gotten the controls in place to make sure it's done in a privacy sensitive manner. That's really important. And that's where the AI teams cannot live in a silo. They have to work very closely with other areas. We work very closely with our legal teams, we have a separate privacy and data governance team where we work, neck to neck, shoulder to shoulder with them to make sure that anything we do is always in compliance from that perspective. Because it's a great point, because the ownership of the data isn't always clear. In our case, it is clear because of the way we've set it up. But as you go deeper into AI, for example, I think just a broader comment about AI is it's not clear today how a lot of these AI organizations that are coming out, like OpenAI and Gemini from Google, where they're taking data from the internet and utilizing it and producing outputs to us. Who owns that data and the intellectual property? I'll give an example where my kids the other day wanted to create a gift for their friend. They wanted to print a T-shirt, and so they wanted an image on that T-shirt. And so they just asked the AI tool, can you generate an image of this character? And it did. And I was a little surprised because I would have thought, aren't there licensing agreements? Like, who owns that image itself? Is it now this AI company, or are they going to be questioned by those other the company that actually owns the license to that character? So that sort of intellectual property ownership and all, I think those questions are going to start coming up. I think they are starting to come up even around where companies like OpenAI are starting to use data blanketly off the internet and then profiting from it. I think the companies that own that content are going to start raising questions, and they have started already.
It's already happening as we're speaking. There's a good case study. I'll maybe invite you for one more session, Sanjeev, because there was one element on return on investments, which I wanted to touch upon, but I know that would be a big topic of its own. But for today, thanks a lot, Sanjeev, for joining us, and I'll speak to you soon again.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thank you.